algorithm. We hear it all the time, but it doesn't even feel like most of us really know what it is. I was even Googling it. I'm like, do I truly understand what an algorithm is? So would you mind just kicking us off with that? Like, what is an algorithm?
So yeah, to make a long story short, an algorithm is essentially a set of instructions that a computer is going to run. So if you want an analogy, think of like a recipe. So your mom has got a recipe for cookies that she makes. So in that recipe, there's going to be all the ingredients that are required for the cookies, but there will also be the baking instructions, the things you need to do. You know, do you need to warm the butter? Do you need to melt the butter? You know, those type of things, those instructions are all part of the algorithm of turning those raw ingredients, in the case of a computer, data, into something useful on the other end. So when we hear about, well, it's an algorithm that is potentially discriminating against folks, one of the first things that a lot of people will say, well, an algorithm can't do that. It's just data. And that is true. The algorithm itself isn't necessarily biased. It's just the data that you feed to it is biased. So in the case of where these companies are using data, they're going and they're pulling information. Well, if you're pulling information from, did someone live here? You know where they lived. If that is a predominantly black neighborhood or brown neighborhood, then you maybe give that a lower score than if it was a predominantly white neighborhood. You can pull data from, if someone used a payday loan, well, where was the payday loan place located? You look at the zip code. Oh, this is a predominantly brown neighborhood or in a predominantly black neighborhood. Maybe you score that differently than a payday loan that is in a predominantly white neighborhood. So yeah, it all is just data, but the interpretation of the data is what is problematic. And in this particular case, why there's a class action lawsuit is that it hasn't been settled yet, but it looks like the data that is being fed into these algorithms is got bias intent based off of where you live, who you are, what your name is. You know, if you have had a record before, I will give you the triple whammy on an algorithm. You might get penalized for having been charged for a crime, not actually convicted of one. There are algorithms that are widely inaccurate when it comes to facial recognition, but there are police departments all around the country that use facial recognition to identify suspects. We have heard story after story of people being misidentified. They're charged until they get in front of a judge. The judge says, well, this isn't you, case dismissed. But when you go to put your application in, it didn't ask, was your case dismissed? It asked, were you charged? So the fact that you simply may have been charged for something that wasn't even you can lower your score. And that ultimately keeps you from getting an apartment. And it just so happens that things like that, facial recognition mismatches, happen way more with black and brown women and men than they do with white men and women. So just so many things that go into this to where, yes, the algorithm itself isn't necessarily biased, but the way you interpret the data that the algorithm is fed can be. And that's what leads to problems.